Welcome back to Cards and Comics. Today I want to talk about the definitions of what modern and vintage baseball cards are and how they just don't make any sense. Because when you have a card like this that we all agree is vintage, but we say, well, it's also pre-war. Okay, it's from before 1942. But then we have a card like this from 1962 and we say it's post-war and vintage. Okay, so they're both vintage from different eras. But then this card from 1979, this card's also vintage. Well, that's 70 years difference between this card and this card. And it was completely distributed and made completely different. So they don't look anything alike. And we're still saying they're both vintage. And then you have a card like this just 1 year later. And most hobbyists are saying that this card is now modern. And this card is made 42 years ago. And we're saying it and a card like this are now the same type of card. They're both modern cards. To me, that definition just doesn't make any sense. You're looking at a card that basically is a shiny metal card compared to a standard cardboard card that looks like something made, again, from the 1950s and 60s. So today on Cards and Comics, I'm going to be looking at other areas of collecting, such as comic books, for inspiration on how better to define the eras of collecting baseball cards. So join me now on this journey to see if you agree with me or you don't, but can we better define what a vintage or modern card is on this episode of Cards and Comics. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, why do we need to better define the baseball card era or ages for the cards that people collect? So first of all, these eras or these definitions create a common frame of reference when having baseball card discussions. So when you're talking to other collectors, you go to shows and you say, I collect vintage, I collect pre-war. There's a frame of reference there that most people recognize what you mean. But I guarantee when you say I collect modern, man, that's a huge, wide, open definition that most people don't agree upon. And that's sort of the point of the video, is can we do better at creating some more common frame of references and definitions. Now, currently, in most people's vernacular, there's 3 accepted eras or ages for baseball card manufacturing. So the first one's very simple. It's pre-war. It's anything from 1941 or prior. Vintage cards, is anything from 1942 to 1979. And again, that's 37 years. That's a big time gap or time lapse. Or it's just lumped in as post-war. I think post-war is the most silly definition, because literally it's in perpetuity any card from 1942 or beyond. So to me, I hate the term post-war because I just feel like it's so broad and doesn't have a real meaning. Vintage, again, is very broad. I talk to a lot of collectors and they'll say, I collect vintage. And I'm like, oh, what do you collect? And they go, oh, I collect 90s inserts. I'm like, I'm not sure that's vintage. And they're like, well, it's 30 years ago. Okay, well, that to some folks is a lot of time. And so to them, a 93 refractor is vintage. So I think we can do a better job of defining what those cards really are in terms of, their impact on collectors in a common name form that makes more sense than just modern or vintage. Now, again, there's very little agreement on these dates and definitions in the hobby. I show you these 3 definitions, and you're going to have a lot of people being like, no, you can't call anything from 1980 or beyond modern, or vintage stopped in 75 with a 75 top set, or vintage stopped in 1974 when they got rid of the series. So you're going to get a lot of people, or they stopped in 71. So you get a lot of people who say vintage, stopped in various years. And so we'll get into that a little bit later, but again, very little agreement. And this is one of those great hobby debates that a lot of people like to have. The hobby has changed, and the term modern and vintage, again, make no sense. Again, those 2 terms take up, 80 years of collecting for 2 basic, definitions of cards. That doesn't make any sense. the hobby itself has changed dramatically. The technology has changed. The distribution methods have changed. How cards, again, are printed has changed dramatically. So to me, it's a make, these, just using these two terms and by themselves for every card made after 1941 just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then, one thing, I talked about and I'm going to look at is, other hobbies, such as comic books have definitions that may be worth looking into. Now, the first hobby I'm going to look into here isn't actually comic books, it's card collecting, because they do some things uniquely that I think are worth looking at. First of all, they have definitions from different sources. So they have the Classic Card Club of America. And again, they have a definition of, what, a classic car is, right? So it's got to be high priced. It's got to be really top end quality and built in limited quantities. So they're really talking like, what this definition of a classic car. And you see that nothing in there is built in around time or date. So a classic car could be made today. It just has to be priced high end quality, and limited quantity. So I think for most card collectors, baseball card collectors, that definition doesn't work for a lot of people. Now, insurance companies, again, define classic cars a little differently. Some definitions are 25 to 30 years old. And again, they're looking at, that's the time period where hot rods and muscle cars are really, really popular. And it's a very popular time period to collect cars. The Antique Auto Club of America has what they call the 74 rule, which is cars that are 25 years or older are antiques. So they have this kind of like moving 25-year period that basically after 25 years, the car, cars are now antiques, or they have a different definition. And I do think that if you look at a lot of collectibles and a lot of hobbies, after 25 years, it's hard to say that another era or age doesn't start. To me, that's a good rule of thumb, is like after 25 years, there's a different thing that's going on in that hobby, or with how those cards or whatever collectible is being made. So that is kind of a rule of thumb. After 25 years, maybe we should look at a new definition for whatever is being made. And again, the American Collector Insurance has three definitions, just like I talked about with sports cards. They have the vintage as 1930 and earlier. That's very similar to what some people have. I'll show later on for sports cards. Antique, 1930 to 75, and then classic, 75 to 90. And again, everything from 1990 and beyond to them is like a modern car. So that's, again, a little close to some of the definitions that some people actually use for baseball cards in the hobby today. So it's very interesting. Now, comic books. Now, this is the biggest parallel, because comic books and comic book collectors love to have this debate. This is, again, a classic debate amongst comic book collectors, these different ages of comic books. So I went to some sources of authority. I went to this article that was in Overstreet Guide to Grading Comics. It's called, Comic Book Ages, Defining the Eras. And again, it's summarized in an article on Comic Book Daily. So if you go on Google Comic Book Daily, you'll see this article. And so the first age they talk about is the Victorian age. Now, this age is, to me, not even really comic books. If you really get into what these are really just like books with pictures in them that tell stories. So these aren't traditional comic books, but again, there are kind of proto comic books that existed in this time period. And you got to remember that baseball cards existed in the 1800s. So it's not the fact that, there wasn't something like a comic book, but there was definitely sports cards in the 1880s. Platinum age. So this is, the age, from 1883 to 1938. Again, there are, we call it like comic books that are very much what we consider to be sort of a comic book today, but a lot of them are anthologies of actual strips that were just collected in a book. So again, a little different than what we have today. But again, most people say from 1938 to 1945, the golden age of comic books, begins with the Action Comics #1. So that's in a lot of people's, wheelhouse in terms of definitions. It's not as debated on that side of it, but this next one definitely is something that a lot of people don't agree with, which is something called the Atom Age. Starts with the comic book Fear of the Bomb in 1946. I don't really know about this, so this is one of the ones where I'm even a little unsure of. I don't know that a lot of people even would use this, but this is, again, in this article. Silver Age from 56 to 71. Again, around 15 years of time period here. And this is with Showcase #4, which is the first Silver Age Flash appearance. So again, a lot of people debate these things like, well, which comic book should be the first? Why is this one, the golden or the Silver Age, starting point? Again, it's very debatable, but this is, what, again, this article talked about, and it's in a lot of other people's, articles about what started ages. Bronze Age, Death of Gwen Stacy, and Spider-Man 121. And again, around 14 years of time period here. Copper Age from 86 to 92. This started with, what we call, Watchmen, DC Crisis on Infinite Earths. A lot of people would start it in 84, which is like the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. A lot of people have Bronze Age going, or Silver Age going longer. So, there's all these kind of different definitions, but, I view this to be kind of okay because Watchmen and DC Crisis Infinite Earths definitely changed the landscape of comic books forever. Definitely a landmark year in 1986. Chrome Age, which, is Image Comics and Valiant Comics and come to power those time periods. It's not used often, but you see it here. And then Modern Age, 2000 and present. And again, this is proposed by a lot of sources to just call it Modern Age. I've heard a lot of other names, Plastic Age, whatever you want to call it. But, it's not been, given any name that's stuck other than just kind of modern. People want to call it Variant Age. There's a lot of different people throwing things out there, but nothing's really stuck. Now, for comic books, the thing that we want to talk about here is, again, not 100% agreement on the different, ages. Again, there's tons of lists you can go out and look. Again, numbers, years, definitions are all in disagreement. Again, many sources use a simplified version. So just like in sports cards where you have the 3 different ages or eras, in comic books you'll see a lot of it's boiled down to platinum, gold, silver, bronze, and modern. And so that's a very simplified version of it. And it notably removes the Copper and Chrome Age. I think Chrome Age isn't as important as Copper Age because Copper Age is what, again, is a time period that a lot of modern collectors really love. The biggest issue, again, with this is a time lag or time between ages. So if you look at Platinum, it's a 40-year period, and Modern, it would be 37 years, and that's a long period of time. Again, I go back to that rule of 25. 25 years is kind of where you want to, in my opinion, that's sort of when you want to look at. Especially as it goes on, you could say Platinum, we don't care about as much, but, after that, 25 years, maybe that's a rule of thumb. But, taking away the Copper and Chrome ages is very hard for these collectors because a lot of people in the hobby, pretty much today, a lot of, again, 30-year-old collectors grew up collecting these Copper and Chrome age books. And that's sort of what's hot today in terms of what people are really collecting. And plus it breaks up that modern era from 37 years, really breaks that up into different eras and ages that you can say, I'm a Copper Age collector. That would define it much better than say I'm a modern collector. And they're like, well, okay, you love modern variants. No, I collect Wolverine comics from the 80s. Like, well, okay, well, that's not really modern. What is it? Well, it's Copper Age. Okay, well, that makes a little more sense. So it does make sense when you look at it in that term to break up that time period. Now, so looking at those two, cars and comics, how would I, look at, myself, what criteria would I use to define a sports card era or age? So I think, number one, the start of an era age should have a reason. Reasons can be an important rookie card, a new company is formed or came into the hobby. There's some great creative new innovation, a new way to distribute cards. So again, there has to be something that happened to create the new age, a new definition. Again, the rule of 25, I don't think 25 years should be, I don't think it should be a hard and fast rule, but you should definitely say after 25 years, there's probably been enough innovation and change that we should be looking at something, a new age has appeared. They should have something in common to how collectors collect. The reason why I say that is, in my opening look, is that, if you say I collect vintage cards, but I collect tobacco cards, most guys who are heavy into tobacco cards don't collect 1970s Topps cards. I know some people do, but there's a lot of collectors who just collect pre-war. And you wouldn't say just because I collect vintage, you would just assume that if I collect vintage, I collect just T cards. That's someone who says, well, I only collect pre-war. And so to me, the idea that, those cards don't have a lot in common because, again, 70 years difference in age, to me, those two things shouldn't have a similar definition. And then different sports can have different eras. I mentioned it earlier. Basketball, football, baseball shouldn't have the same years and definitions because, again, these different important reasons happened differently for each of these sports. So you wouldn't say the years that line up for baseball to have an era wouldn't line up the same way for basketball. So let's go through important events. So first of all, starting in 1886, really the first tobacco card is issued. So that gives us our first anchor. And again, going through the list, some major milestones. 1909, we have the T206 set, which has a Honus Wagner rookie card, the most expensive card in the hobby. 1933, you have the Gowdy set, again with the 4 Babe Ruth cards, the Lou Gehrig cards, iconic, one of the 4 Horsemen sets of the hobby. In 1941, you had the last major pre-war set to come out, which is 41 Play Ball. Again, iconic cards of Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio in full color. So in 48, you have the first major post-war set, which included the 48 Bowman set, which has major Hall of Fame rookie cards such as Stan Musial, Warren Spahn, Yogi Berra. Followed that up in 49 with the Leaf set, which had the Jackie Robinson and Satchel Paige rookie. So those two sets really captured, let's say, a lot of those missing rookie cards and players, from sets that, because there was a big gap in years and sets and baseball cards. So they just got caught up. And it's almost like 86 Fleer, where there's just a ton of players who didn't have rookie cards because there wasn't a lot of sets being made. And so they all got thrown into one set. And so those two sets really captured a lot of those players. So in 52, you had really the first, I would call, like, big jump in card quality, which is the oversized 52 Topps set, which again has two of the most iconic cards in the hobby, the Mickey Mantle, the Willie Mays cards, and also the Jackie Robinson card. Just iconic set and really set a new standard for the hobby. In 56, so this is a very important year because Topps bought Bowman for $200,000 and becomes a monopoly. They followed that up in 57 by basically standardizing the size of baseball cards to the current size today, 2.5 by 3.5. And so that's a major change in the hobby that has stuck since 1957, which is the standard baseball card size. In 1969, you had the last Mickey Mantle base card from Topps. In 73, you have the last full set issued by Topps in series, and also Willie Mays' last card, base card. Then in 81, you had Fleer and Donruss breaking the Topps monopoly, making cards. And you could say in 63, you had a Fleer set, but it was a one and done. 81 was when it became every year that you had multiple companies producing cards. 89, Upper Deck issues the first major premium set. Again, it's packaged differently, it's produced differently, there's holograms, it's completely different, and it includes an iconic card, the Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card. In 91, Donruss issues the first serial numbered insert card into the Elite set, and also the first serial numbered autograph card with the Ryan Sandberg auto. In 94, you have the strike, and that really started the decline for baseball card manufacturers and demand. You had sort of overproduction before that, and then the strike really hurt demand. And basically this started the end for a lot of manufacturers, because in '98, Donruss, Pinnacle Brands filed for bankruptcy, and its brands were purchased by Playoff. 2001, the first autographed Bowman Chrome rookie cards were issued, highlighted by the Albert Pujols rookie card auto, which is still one of the most important modern, I'd say, or player who's still playing today, rookie cards that ever been issued. 2005 is a very important year. Two major events happened in 2005. One was Major League Baseball reduced the card licenses to just Upper Deck and Topps, so they started consolidation. 2005, Fleer and Skybox basically announced it will no longer produce cards, and they entered into a liquidation of its assets. So I don't throw in here that Marvel at one point had bought Fleer and basically bankrupted it by overproducing cards. But Fleer and Skybox, they in 2005 they lost their baseball card license, so they realized the writing was on the wall, and they went into liquidation. And so that's where you had like Upper Deck buying a lot of its assets. That's why Upper Deck now has that Skybox brand. 2006 introduced the new rookie card logo and the rules for what a rookie card is, and that created the whole pre-rookie card of the Bowman Chrome cards, which started this whole new era of the pre-rookie and rookie cards. And then Topps becomes the exclusive manufacturer of Major League Baseball cards in 2009, which is still ongoing today, and cutting Upper Deck out, which basically gave Topps, again, a Major League Baseball monopoly. So, what are some other definitions used by other people? So I gave you the most common definition, but there are other definitions that other people have in the hobby to define baseball cards in this hobby. So again, early days, so the Hall of Fame Veterans Committee, so go back to Hall of Fame Veterans Committee. So these are the people who the Veterans Committee votes on players who didn't make it the first time around. So they have a committee to look at these players again, and they've created an era. So I think right now they don't do every era, of playing every time they vote. They, it's like a rotation. So they've got it now based, they've defined it as early days, pre-50, golden days, 50 to 69, modern, 70 to 87, and today's game, 88 to present. Now, Big League Cards, which is a company and has a website, so you can Google Big League Cards and look at this for yourself. But they put out a different definition. They put out early era from 32 and prior. So that's basically, pre-war, but they made a distinction of having bubblegum era, which is basically calling out the 33 Gowdy set up into 1951. And then they had the golden era, which is basically 52 Topps to 69, which is Mickey Mantle years. So they basically just said the golden era is when Mickey Mantle played and had cards. 1970 to 1980 was their silver age or silver era. They have what they call the boom era, which is an era that's hard to define, but they called it from 81 to 2005. Again, 81, you had your Fleer and Donruss starting, but then 2005, you had the consolidation. You had the Fleer going bankrupt. And then in 2006, you had the introduction of the rookie card logo. So those are very big events in baseball card history. So how would I define these ages and eras? So this is my CNC era and ages for baseball cards. So this is my take on what I would do. So first of all, I would start with, something like Platinum Age or Tobacco Age, or even call it TNC era, which is Tobacco and Candy era, which is 1886 to 32. So this is 46 years. Violates my 25-year, kind of like policy, but it makes sense because, again, there's a lot of years where not a lot of cards were being made. It begins with the old Judge set and ends before issuing of the very widely distributed cards of Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth in the 33 Gowdy set. So 33 Gowdy is one of the four horsemen of the hobby. So to me, the golden age really starts with 33 Gowdy. So a lot of people want to say the 50s is where golden age baseball really hit, but to me, Babe Ruth was the alpha and omega of the baseball card market today, and then he really kicked off I think the fascination and love of baseball into America. To me, that started the golden age. And so, the 33 Goudey set is such an iconic set. Again, this era goes through 52, which again has another of the Four Horsemen sets, the 52 top set, which has, the Mantle, the Mays, the Jackie Robinson, the Eddie Matthews card. So again, those two sets are really, outside the T206 set. Then you have the 33 Goudey set, the 52 top set. That is, encompasses tons of what people consider to be iconic golden age era cards. And I have it ending in 56, which, 56 is the year that Topps purchased Bowman and really kicked off the Topps monopoly. Now, 57 to 80 is what I call Silver Age. And the reason why I think, again, this is such a big year in 57 is 57 was the first year that Topps issued standard size cards. And to me, I know it doesn't seem like such a big innovation, but you got to remember, if you look at cards before 57, they had multiple sizes. They were big, they were small. I mean, there was just no real rule to them. This created what we consider to be what a standard baseball card is today. And it holds true, again, all the way to now. Now, I call this the Topps era because, basically this, begins and ends with Topps monopoly. And again, 1981 ushered in a new era because, again, of these two new companies starting producing cards. And to me, it lines up with a lot of people also saying that, 1980 was kind of the end of, Topps and kind of like the Silver Age or 70s card. So it does kind of fit two definitions, but I'm really basing off of the start of standardized cards in 57 and ending with Topps's monopoly being crushed by Fleer and Donruss. So in 81, the Bronze Age starts, or I call it the transition era because it's small. It's only 7 years. And it's basically Fleer and Donruss starts producing cards. The quality and photo start to dramatically improve. Look at 84 Donruss as your first real major improvement in card quality. But in 85, 85 Donruss, 86 Donruss, you had a really nice 87 top set, 87 Donruss set. So the quality starts becoming better and better. Tiffany and glossy sets started being produced. You had Tiffany sets, you had glossy sets, so you had premium quality base cards being made. So technology starts to improve. So I call this like the transition year or the Bronze Age, where things start to get better, but it's still kind of messy and we don't really know, there hasn't been a dramatic change, but things are starting to change. The dramatic change happens in 1989. So we're calling this the Copper Age or the Insert Era. In 89 through 2005, again, 16 years, Upper Deck drops the bomb. They create this just visually stunning set, totally different quality, totally different designs, just, tons of innovations, holograms, just a lot of stuff going on. And they also dropped in as their first card, the most popular player of the 90s and his most iconic, and, a lot of people say this, one of the better looking cards ever made, the Griffey Jr. rookie card. So that really just started this ramp up in innovation. It took off. The hobby all had to catch up. Immediately, all the other manufacturers had to get better and make better cards. So that innovation really created a lot of new insert sets. A lot of creativity came into the hobby. So you had first ever autos, game used cards, refractors. I mean, tons of new inserts, tons of new designs. But however, that time period, again, we mentioned the baseball strike and then the slow descent of the hobby. And it ended in 2005 with basically Topps and Upper Deck getting the licenses, everyone else getting frozen out, and Fleer and Skybox ceasing production and liquidating their assets. And basically the hobby gets a lot smaller. So modern age. So what we're in today, again, we're 16 years into it, 2006 through 2022. And it really begins in 2006 with Major League Baseball announcing that they have a new rookie card logo and rules around what a rookie card is. And it's really important because basically in the 90s, up until that 2005 period, rookie cards were important, but the 2001 Bowman Chrome Albert Pujols really started something that took off once this definition of rookie cards and pre-rookie cards really became final. And then once Topps got that exclusive contract in 2009, really prospecting rookie cards become just all that anyone ever really wants to collect. Yes, some inserts and some modern cards, like autographs and patches are still collected, but really the hobby is driven by these rookie and prospect cards. So to me, the hobby did change because it's how we collected change. Looking at it, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ages of baseball cards. With the current age, modern age, or rookie prospect era. And the one era I think really matters to a lot of people right now is the copper age or insert era. A lot of people are really focused on this era right now. To me, this is the part that really became hard, not hard for me to look at, but I don't want to call it vintage and I don't want to call it modern. So I wanted to come up with something different. And a lot of the people were calling it the insert era or, something else. So to me, copper age, insert era, whatever other name you want to call it, it's very different. People collected cards very differently in this time period. And they're actually to me, I see tons of growth in those cards today. And a lot of people just focus on those years. So to me, they're not modern. They're not, what people are collecting today. Because again, most collectors focus on today is rookies and prospects. So tell me what you guys think. Does this make sense? How would you break it down? How would you take these eras and split them apart for baseball cards? Let me know in the comments. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time on Cards and Comics.